I am proud to introduce Ginny Messina, also known as the Vegan RD. She is a registered dietitian with a master's degree in public health. She is co-author of 3 books on vegan nutrition: Vegan for Life, Vegan for Her, and Never Too Late to Go Vegan. She's also co-authored a textbook for health professionals, which is called The Dietitian's Guide to Vegetarian Diets. She writes about a variety of issues related to health and vegan activism on her blog, The Vegan RD, and speaks about vegan nutrition at scientific events for health professionals as well as events for the public. Ginny is on the board of directors of Veg Fund and on the board of advisors for the Vegetarian Resource Group. In the past, she's taught nutrition to dietetics students and counseled clients in a variety of healthcare settings. When she isn't working on projects related to nutrition, she volunteers for her local animal shelter and works with programs to promote spay and neuter. She lives in Port Townsend, Washington with her husband and an ever-changing population of rescue cats. Please welcome Ginny Messina.
Thank you. I assume that the microphone is on. Sounds like it. Okay, great. Thank you so much for that introduction, and it is wonderful to be here. I was actually just in Atlanta 3 weeks ago speaking at the national annual meeting of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is the national gathering of dietitians. So I was talking about vegan diets to dietitians, and many of whom don't know anything about vegan diets, and that was really fun. But I have to say the food is way better at the Atlanta Veg Fest. So it's really, really great to be here. I'm very happy. It's my first time at this Veg Fest, and it's an honor to be invited. I'm going to be talking today about the 7 habits of healthy, happy vegans. Going vegan, just taking the first steps towards a vegan diet, is the most important decision that you can make. It brings your actions in line with your ethics and your sense of compassion. It reduces your carbon footprint, and most people are going to gain some health benefits along the way when they start going vegan. So there's really no other dietary choice that can do all 3 of those things. But there can be some bumps along the way as well when people first start going vegan. And it's not because vegan diets are difficult. It's simply because we don't have cultural or historical habits to fall back on. So we have to learn how to be vegan. We're starting from scratch. So most people are going to have some questions about what to eat, how to meet nutrient needs. They're going to need a little bit of help when they first start going vegan. I'm going to be looking at these 7 guidelines or practices as a way of showing you how easy it is to plan a healthy vegan diet. I'm going to cover a lot of material in a very short period of time, but if you go to my website after the presentation, theveganrd.com, you'll see that I've put my this slide presentation up on the website under the pages on the left-hand side. So you can see the slide presentation, and I also have a handout there with the highlights from today's presentation and with my food guide. So if you don't catch some of the things that I say today, you'll be able to find that information on my website, and I'll give you my email address at the end of the talk so that if you think of something somewhere down the road that you need to know more about, you can drop me an email. So let's start by talking about legumes and why they're so important in vegan diets. Legumes are a big part of the answer to that annoying question that all vegetarians and vegans hear: where do you get your protein when you don't eat meat? Well, the fact is we get our protein from all kinds of plant foods. All plant foods, with the exception of fats and fruits, are good sources of protein. So we get protein from grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, and vegetables. Our need for protein is actually a need for amino acids. These are the building blocks of protein. We take the protein that's in foods that we eat, break it down into the individual amino acids, and then rearrange the amino acids into new proteins, whatever our bodies need. We can make many of the amino acids that our bodies require, but there are 9 of them that we can't synthesize. These are the 9 essential amino acids. We have to get them from our diet, so they are dietary essentials. And all grains, legumes, vegetables, nuts, and seeds do contain all 9 of the essential amino acids. You will sometimes hear people say that plant foods are lacking in 1 or more of the amino acids. It's not true. They have all of them, but they're always a little bit low in 1 or more of them. So the reason that legumes are so important is because they're the best plant sources of one of the essential amino acids, lysine. And it's very difficult to meet lysine needs if you're not including legumes in your diet. Legumes, the family of legumes includes cooked dried beans, all of the soy foods, tofu, tempeh, veggie meats, soy milk, and peanuts and peanut butter. They're legumes, they're not nuts.
Yeah, this is right.
You wanted to see those slides again anyway, right? I'm giving away all my secrets now. Okay, so in order to make sure you're meeting needs not just for protein, but for lysine, it's important to include at least 3 servings per day of legumes in your diet. And it's a small amount of food. It's a half a cup of cooked beans, tofu, or tempeh, a 1/4 cup of soy nuts or peanuts, 2 tablespoons of peanut butter, a cup of soy milk, or an ounce of veggie meats. 2 other foods, pistachios and quinoa, are what I think of as sort of honorary legumes. They're not really legumes botanically, but they're high enough in protein and lysine that they can stand in for legumes. So I like to sneak them into my list of servings of legume serving sizes. You can count a cup of quinoa or a 1/4 cup of pistachios as a serving of legumes. They are legumes. Yes, lentils are legumes. I include lentils as cooked dried beans. People sometimes will say lentils, split peas, and beans. When I talk about beans, I'm talking about all of those foods. So yeah, lentils are a wonderful source of protein and lysine. Now, I grew up in a family where the only time we ever saw any kind of bean was baked beans on the 4th of July. So when I went vegetarian, before I went vegan, I really just didn't have the foggiest idea about what to do with the bean. And certainly had never seen a block of tofu in my life. And so I think a lot of people are like that. You know, that was a long time ago, but I think even today, a lot of people when they first start going vegan are a little bit confused or nervous about what they're going to do with legumes, how they're ever going to get these foods into their diet. But when you consider the fact that this is a very diverse group of foods, it's not just beans, but it's all these wonderful soy foods, and peanuts and peanut butter, and pistachios and quinoa. When you consider that, along with the fact that the serving sizes are pretty small, it's really not that difficult. And you can see from this list of foods that I have up here that there are lots of choices, like a PB&J sandwich or a hummus wrap, that are kind of friendly and familiar foods. So even for people who think they're not big on beans, there are plenty of options to work legumes into your diet. Now, fats are something we need to talk about in vegan diets because it's important to make sure that you're including healthy fats and choosing the right ones when you go vegan. I think a lot of times when people first go vegan, they think that they're also supposed to eliminate all fatty foods from their diet. And one thing that can happen when people do that, they haven't just given up meat and cheese and milk and eggs, they've also given up nuts and seeds and tofu and added vegetable oils. And they start to feel like something is kind of missing in their diet. Like there's just something that's not quite right. They're not quite satisfied with what they're eating. And they might start to gravitate towards foods that are not especially good for them, like that beautiful cake that woman is looking at. Or they might start to sneak some animal foods back into their diet because they're mistaking this craving for something as a craving for animal foods, when all they really need to do is to add some healthy fats to their meals, and that would take care of it. At the very least, we need to make sure that we are meeting needs for the essential omega-3 fatty acid, alpha-linolenic acid, abbreviated as ALA. This is a fatty acid that is an essential nutrient, and it's found in only a handful of plant foods. So we really need to make sure that we're including these foods in our diets. These are the best sources of alpha-linolenic acid: ground flaxseed oil, walnuts, walnut, hemp seeds, soy, and canola oils, and chia seeds. And you can see that you only need really small amounts of these foods in order to meet your needs for alpha-linolenic acid. For example, just a tablespoon of ground flaxseed during the day would be enough to give you all of the alpha-linolenic acid you need for that day. So it's not hard. You just need to make sure that you're including these foods in your diet on a daily basis. Now, there are a couple of other omega-3 fats that we hear a lot about, DHA and EPA. These are the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. These are the ones that are found in fish and fatty fish and fish oil. And there's some evidence that they might be associated with lower risk for heart disease and for some neurological problems like dementia and depression. Now, typically, theoretically, DHA and EPA are not essential nutrients because we can manufacture them in our body. We can make all that we need from alpha-linolenic acid, the essential omega-3 fat, the one that you get from flax seeds and walnuts. The reality is that conversion is really poor. And so what we see in different populations is that people who don't eat fish, and that would include vegans of course, tend to have low blood levels of DHA and EPA. Now, whether that's a problem is something that we just don't know. Vegans are already eating a heart-healthy diet for the most part. And so does it matter that they're not getting DHA and EPA? You know, there's one school of thought that says it really doesn't, but we don't have studies to show us. And so it's definitely a question where we just don't really have good answers yet. But for vegans or anybody else, any person who doesn't want to use fish, doesn't want to take fish oil, it's not true that they need to eat those foods in order to get enough DHA and EPA. Fish get their DHA and EPA by eating microalgae, and we can go to the same source. We can take supplements of DHA and EPA derived from microalgae. They're packaged in non-gelatin capsules, so they are completely vegan, and they are available for vegans. It is the exact same DHA and EPA that you would get by eating salmon or tuna fish. It's the same thing, except it's from a source that is more compassionate and it's more sustainable. So, in fact, it's so much more sustainable that I think even non-vegans should really be using this as their source of DHA and EPA. I do recommend small supplements of DHA and EPA to vegans simply because we don't have all of the answers about this. I like to err on the safe side. I like to always make sure that vegans are as healthy as possible. That is my thing, is making sure that vegans never have nutrient deficiencies. And so I recommend 200 to 300 milligrams of DHA and EPA combined, just 2 or 3 times per week. That's a small dose. It's much lower than what the major health organizations are recommending, but I think that because vegans have such healthy diets, that this is probably all that we actually need. So we need to make sure that we're getting enough of the essential omega-3 fatty acid, alpha-linolenic acid, and we might do well to take a small supplement of DHA and EPA. But what about other higher fat foods in vegan diets? These foods, fairly high in fat, nuts, seeds, avocado, olives, and vegetable oils can play roles in healthy vegan diets and sometimes even help vegans stay vegan and be a little bit healthier. For example, nuts and seeds are excellent sources of the mineral zinc and can be a very important source of zinc for vegans. So people who don't include any of these foods in their diets do run the risk of running a little bit short on zinc. There's tons of evidence that consuming, including nuts in your diets, lowers your risk for heart disease. There are lots and lots of studies that show that, and lots of reasons why we know from a biochemical standpoint that nuts are so good for heart health. Replacing some of the carbohydrate in diets of people with diabetes with healthier fats, like nuts and monounsaturated fats from olive oil, can actually improve diabetic control for some people. Some people just do better on diets that are a little bit lower in carbohydrates, and this is a way to do that and still keep the diet vegan and healthy. And the same thing is true with heart disease. Replacing some carbohydrate in the diets with a little bit of healthy plant fat improves cholesterol profiles. And so that can be a good thing for people to do, especially if they're not doing well on a low-fat vegan diet. So how do we fit these fats into a healthy vegan diet? It's not by pouring buckets of olive oil all over your salads all day long or munching on nuts all day long, but judicious use of these foods can be a very good fit for healthy vegan diets. This menu is one of my favorite ways of vegan meal planning. It's a sort of Mediterranean diet. It takes the best elements of healthy Japanese eating and combines them with the best elements of healthy Mediterranean eating. It's very much the way I eat myself. So the higher fat foods in this menu are the tofu, which is in the breakfast, it's moderately high in fat. And then the nuts that are part of one of the snacks, and a little bit of vegetable oil and a vinaigrette at lunchtime, and a little bit of vegetable oil to saute vegetables at dinner time. The oil that's used to saute the vegetables, the greens, will actually enhance the absorption of nutrients from those greens, and also the absorption of phytochemicals. Some of the phytochemicals that reduce chronic disease will be absorbed better with a little bit of added fat in those veggies. So if you look at the numbers that I have down on the right-hand side, you see that this is about 1,800 calories, and it gets less than 3% of its calories from saturated fat. So this is a really low saturated fat diet. And there's no cholesterol, because there's no cholesterol in plant foods. So no matter how much fat you pack into your vegan diet, there will never be any cholesterol. So this is a good indication of how easy it is to include higher fat foods in a healthy vegan diet. And if you enjoy eating these foods, there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't do so. So vitamin D and vitamin B12, I think that a lot of times when people are not feeling well on their vegan diets, it's because they have suboptimal intakes of these two particular nutrients. Even when you're getting enough to prevent overt deficiency of B12 and vitamin D, if your intake is marginal or just suboptimal, it can kind of result in these sort of vague symptoms, like a little bit of fatigue or vague aches and pains, depression, poor concentration. And we hear people complaining of those kinds of things when they feel like they're not doing well on their vegan diet. So these are problems for people who aren't getting enough of these two nutrients. It is so easy to get enough vitamin D and vitamin B12 on a vegan diet that they should never be problems. So let's look at how you do it. The only food that is a good natural source of vitamin D are certain types of fatty fish. And you would have to eat swordfish or salmon every single day of your life in order to get enough vitamin D. And that is not sustainable, it's not healthy, it's not compassionate, it's not an option at all. The only other foods that have vitamin D are foods that are fortified with it. We often think of cow's milk as being a great source of vitamin D. It's not. It just has it because it's added to it. It's no different from adding vitamin D to breakfast cereal, to soy milk, to almond milk. It's all the same thing. Cow's milk is not a good source of vitamin D without the fortification. Now, of course, we evolved to make all the vitamin D we need when our skin is exposed to sunlight. But there are so many things that interfere with that. Smog and cloudiness. People with darker skin need much more sun exposure to make enough vitamin D, and so do older people, people over the age of 50. And it gets harder and harder the older you get to make enough vitamin D. So that means that there are a lot of people who are not making adequate vitamin D, at least during certain times of the year. And it's not a vegan issue. When I talk about a lot of people not making adequate vitamin D, I'm talking about people eating all kinds of diets. So this is not a vegan issue, but of course vegans still need to pay some attention to it. There are two forms of vitamin D. Vitamin D3 is almost always animal derived. It comes from fish oil or from lanolin in sheep's wool. There is a type of vitamin D3 that's on the market now that is vegan. It's made by VitaShine. I believe that's the name of the supplement. But for the most part, vegan supplements of vitamin D use vitamin D2 or ergocalciferol, which is derived from yeast. And as long as people are taking vitamin D supplements on a daily basis, vitamin D2 is as good as vitamin D3 for maintaining healthy vitamin D levels. The RDA for vitamin D is 600 international units per day, so you should make sure that you're taking a supplement that provides at least that amount, or that you're eating foods that add up to provide 600 international units. That supplement, that sample of a supplement that I have up there has 800 international units, and that's okay. You could really take up to 1,000 or so, and that wouldn't be a problem. So aim for between 600 to 1,000. Vitamin B12 is the big issue in vegan nutrition because all the vitamin B12 in the world is manufactured by bacteria. Plants don't contain it, they don't take it up from the soil. They have no use for it, so they don't absorb it from the soil. Now, one of the problems in B12 nutrition is that there are a whole bunch of foods that contain compounds called B12 analogs. These are compounds that look like vitamin B12. They have a similar structure, but they don't have any vitamin B12 activity. And you'll see these foods that are listed up here, like sourdough bread or spirulina or sea vegetables, fermented soy foods, you will often see them mentioned as good sources of vitamin B12. They're not at all. They don't contain B12, they only contain the analogs. So when people depend on these foods as a source of vitamin B12, they do run the risk of deficiency. There's also this question about whether we can get adequate vitamin B12 by eating unwashed organic produce. Now, aside from the fact that it's not a great idea to eat unwashed produce, this has not been shown to provide adequate vitamin B12 for anyone. Some animals can make their own vitamin B12. This is actually a photograph that was taken in my front lawn a couple of years ago. We get lots and lots of baby deer in the springtime. And this little guy is about, probably about a week old, and his mom is already bringing him around to my garden to teach him how to eat expensive perennials. These guys are true herbivores. They synthesize vitamin B12. The bacteria in their intestines synthesize vitamin B12, and they can absorb that and use it. We synthesize B12 in our intestines as well, but it's synthesized too far down for us to make any use of it because we absorb it in a different part of the intestine, so we can't use it. We do store lots of vitamin B12 in our liver and our muscles, and sometimes you can have enough stored to last you for years. But you don't have any way of knowing that. And it depends on what your diet was like before you went vegan. If you were eating a fairly healthy diet that wasn't real high in animal foods, you might not have huge stores. So it's not good to depend on that. It's better to start with vitamin B12 supplementation as soon as you start going vegan. The amount of vitamin B12 that we absorb depends on how much is in the dose that we take. So the less often you take it, the more you need. It's pretty dramatic differences. These are 3 ways to meet vitamin B12 needs. They all refer to cyanocobalamin, which is the recommended type of vitamin B12, not methylcobalamin, which is not recommended. It has not been studied enough, and it's probably not stable enough to protect B12 status. So these all refer to cyanocobalamin, and 3 things that you could do. You could eat 2 servings per day of foods that are fortified with vitamin B12, each providing 1.5 micrograms. Or you could take a daily supplement. I'm standing right in your way, aren't I? You could take a daily supplement providing 25 to 100 micrograms of vitamin B12. That's the way I get mine. I like that. Like daily things or things I can remember. Or you could take 1,000 micrograms just 2 to 3 times per week, and that's an easy way to do it as well. I think everybody knows the importance of eating a rainbow, eating lots and lots of fruits and vegetables. They're so good for us. They're packed with vitamins and minerals, and also with lots of phytochemicals that lower risk for chronic disease. But there are some issues related to fruits and vegetables that are especially important for vegans. They have some special advantages for us, particularly in relation to how we use iron in our diet. Vegans have high iron intakes. A lot of people are surprised to know that, but plant foods are packed with iron. Look at the difference among these foods. A half a cup of lentils has more than twice the amount of iron as 3 ounces of red meat, and way more iron than chicken and fish. And you can see that dairy foods have almost no iron. This is an area where vegans have a real advantage over lacto-ovo vegetarians, because lacto-ovo vegetarians may end up displacing a lot of the iron-rich plant foods in their diet with dairy foods, and they end up with lower iron intake. So this is an advantage for vegans. The issue for us is that iron in plant foods is bound to compounds called phytates that keep the iron from being absorbed. We need to break the iron off of that phytate in order for it to be absorbed. And the best way to do that is to eat foods that contain vitamin C, because vitamin C breaks that bond and frees up the iron for absorption as long as the vitamin C is consumed at the same time as the iron-rich food. So the key to good iron status is, of course, to eat lots of iron-rich foods. The best sources are whole and enriched grains and legumes. But the other part of the equation is to make sure you're eating lots and lots of vitamin C in order to enhance that iron absorption. So we want to make sure we're doing that. And I think that most vegans do that very well without even thinking about it. These are such natural food combinations. A whole grain cereal with some kind of a vitamin C-rich juice or fruit, or some kind of a whole grain, brown rice or quinoa topped with a little bit of tofu with vitamin C rich vegetable, or tossing in some vitamin C rich tomatoes into a bean or lentil soup. We do this kind of stuff automatically, but it's good to pay attention to it to make sure you're including a good source of vitamin C in as many meals and snacks as possible to make the most of the iron in your diet. And this is, of course, especially important for premenopausal women who have very high iron needs and often fall short of meeting those needs, whether they're vegan or not. Fruits and vegetables are also important for vitamin A. Just wanted to mention that very quickly, that they are the only source of vitamin A in vegan diets. And you probably know that the best sources are the vegetables that are very dark, deep orange and yellow, and also the leafy green vegetables. So make sure you're eating those every day too. And fruits and vegetables can also provide us with calcium, which brings me to the next point, the importance of meeting calcium needs on a vegan diet. Now, among vegans, there has long been this belief that we don't need to worry about calcium so much because our diets don't contain animal protein. Have you heard that? Have you heard that theory? Are you familiar with that? It dates back to this study that was published in 1992. The researchers compared animal protein intake in different countries to the rate of hip fractures in those countries. And you can see that there's a really straightforward relationship here, that the more animal protein people eat, the higher their rates of hip fracture. And so that kind of made us think that eating a lot of animal protein was probably bad for bone health. And it caused a shift in perspective towards this idea that maybe osteoporosis wasn't really a disease of too little calcium. Maybe it was a disease of too much meat and dairy. Well, unfortunately, the theory has been kind of debunked in the past few years. For one thing, there are lots of problems with those studies. These are what are known as ecological studies. These are studies that take data from groups of people and compare them instead of comparing data from individuals in those groups. And as a result of that kind of study design, they are not able to control for any variables in the study. And so they miss all kinds of variables that could affect the outcome. This is what the hip fracture studies miss. They miss the fact that people of different ethnic backgrounds sometimes have differences in anatomy that affect their rate of breaking bones. For example, Asian people have what's called a shorter hip axis length. This is a slight difference in the anatomy of their hip that makes it resistant to fracture. So all other things being equal, when an Asian person falls, they are less likely to break their hip. The hip fracture studies miss the fact that in a lot of these countries with the low animal protein intake, people are strong. They're doing physical labor all the time, and that's building strong bones and also keeping them from falling. In a lot of these countries, people have better balance. And if you have good balance, you don't fall. If you don't fall, you don't break your hip. They miss the fact that in a lot of these countries, or at least in some of these countries where hip fracture rates are low, it turns out that osteoporosis rates are high. This is a study that was published just a couple of years ago. These researchers looked at individuals in Japan, Hong Kong, and Sweden, and they looked at rates of hip fracture and of spinal fractures. And as expected, we saw that people in Japan and Hong Kong had lower rates of hip fractures, but look at this. They had higher rates of spinal fractures, the blue and red lines. Now that may seem like a contradiction, but it's not, because hip fractures tend to correlate more with whether or not people fall. Spinal fracture rates tend to correlate with bone health. So this tells us that even though people are not breaking hips in these countries and are eating lower animal protein diets, they still have pretty poor bone health because they're having spinal fractures. And we see this also in a study of vegans. This is a study from the EPIC Oxford study in England, published in 2007. And we found that the absence of animal protein in the vegan diets was not protecting them from fractures, because in this study, vegans were 37% more likely to have a bone fracture compared to people eating lacto-ovo and meat-containing diets. It wasn't because there was anything wrong with the vegan diets. There was nothing inherently wrong with them. It was just that the vegans had lower calcium intakes. So in this regard, the fact that they were eating less animal protein was not protecting their bone health when they weren't getting enough calcium. In the Adventist Health Study, which is the only large-scale study of vegetarians in North America, women who ate the most highest protein foods like veggie meats and legumes had the lowest risk for breaking bones. So in this study, we saw that plant protein was definitely protective of bone health. What we're seeing now as we look at these studies and many, many more studies that have looked very closely at this issue is that protein is actually protective of bone health. For one thing, it promotes calcium absorption in the intestines. So we absorb calcium better when we have enough protein in our diet. And it builds bones, it's a part of bone structure, and it builds muscles, which protect bone health. So we do need to make sure we're getting enough protein in our diet, and we talked about how to do that. It's by eating 3 servings of legumes per day. We've got that covered. The other thing is that we need to make sure we're getting enough calcium in our vegan diets. We know now that low calcium intake is not safe for vegans. We need to try to meet the RDA. Our ancestors had absolutely no problem getting enough calcium without drinking cow's milk. Dairy products didn't come on the scene until 10,000 years ago, and long before that, people had really high intakes of calcium, as much as 3,000 milligrams per day, about 3 times what milk drinkers currently get. And the reason they had so much calcium in their diet was because they were eating lots and lots of calcium-rich leafy green vegetables. A lot of those leafy greens, those wild leafy greens, are gone now. We don't have access to them any longer, but we have lots of great calcium-rich foods for vegans. This is my food guide, the plant plate. It has 5 food groups: whole grains, legumes, fruits, vegetables, and then a small group dedicated to nuts and seeds. There's no calcium group because calcium is found in all of the food groups. So I put the calcium-rich foods on the rim of the plate so that people could see where the calcium-rich foods are and that they actually belong in one of these food groups. We don't have to look for a calcium-rich group. We just eat a wide variety of foods and choose some that are rich in calcium. These are the best sources of calcium for vegans. Calcium set tofu, which is tofu made with calcium sulfate. The firmer it is, the higher it is in calcium. And also whole soybeans are a really good source of calcium. Any kind of fortified plant milk, any kind of fortified plant juice, almond butter and tahini, figs and navel oranges are kind of surprising sources of calcium, but they've got lots of calcium. They're a great choice. And then certain leafy green vegetables. The leafy green veggies that are the best sources of calcium are the ones in the cruciferous vegetable family, the cabbage family, like collards, kale, bok choy, mustard greens, turnip greens. Those are great sources of calcium, very well absorbed. The more delicate greens like spinach and Swiss chard and beet greens are also high in calcium, but it's not absorbed, so we can't depend on them as sources of calcium. It's also important, we talk about nutrition, but I also want to talk about the importance of enjoying your vegan diet. And it doesn't mean that you should be eating vegan chocolate cupcakes all day long, as fun as that would be. But we do know that while there are foods that should be emphasized in vegan diets, there are no foods that are 100% off limits. And I'm not sure why we want to try to convince people that vegan diets are restrictive, because they already think they're restrictive. This is what people think that vegans eat. They think we eat some combination of granola, grass, and tofu, and some little sliver of something else in there. And of course, what we eat is this huge variety of wonderful foods, many, many super healthy foods, and some treats and some convenience foods as well. Good science tells us that there are foods that we should emphasize in our diets, and we know what those foods are. They're whole grains, legumes, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. But more gently processed foods, like tofu, plant milks, there's a peanut milk there in that picture next to the soy milk, certain vegetable oils, a little glass of wine, some juices, these are all part of cultural diets, of diets around the world. They've been parts of these diets for hundreds of years, for centuries. And these are healthy populations who are consuming these foods. So we can include these foods in our diets too. Foods that are a little bit more processed, convenience foods like veggie meats, frozen dinners, some of the wonderful vegan cheeses that are available now. These foods can fit in our diets too. They really help some people who are struggling with staying vegan. Some people don't cook. Some people don't have time to cook or don't know how to cook. Everybody is different, and we have to meet those needs if we want to help people go vegan. So if these foods used in moderation help people stay vegan and help them feel happier as vegans, then it's really worthwhile for them to eat it. And we want to make sure that they know that these foods exist and that they are it's perfectly fine to include them in your diet. The idea that some foods are so dangerous for you, some plant foods are so dangerous for you that you can never ever have them, is a sort of fear-based approach to vegan nutrition. And it does instill fear. And I hear all the time from people who are eating perfectly good vegan diets who think if they make one false move, they're going to keel over and die from some chronic disease. And it just doesn't work like that. Good science tells us that there are foods we should emphasize, we should eat the most often, there are foods we should enjoy more in moderation, and foods like that chocolate cupcake that are treats. Finally, I want to talk very briefly about the importance of celebrating veganism. I think everybody knows that when you first start taking steps towards a vegan diet, eating more plant foods, eating fewer animal foods, that your health is probably going to improve. It depends a little bit on what you were eating before, but for most of us, we're probably going to see some health benefits. These are some findings from the EPIC Oxford study in England again, the one that looked at the fracture rates. And you can see very clearly that vegans have much lower blood cholesterol levels compared to the meat eaters. And the thing that's really interesting about this study is that the meat eaters in this study were health-conscious meat eaters. And so they were eating less meat, fewer animal products, more whole grains, just a better diet overall than the average meat eater, and yet the vegans still did so much better. So we do know that there are some wonderful health benefits that can come from being a vegan. However, a vegan diet is not a guarantee that you will never, ever get sick or have any health problems. It is not a guarantee that you're going to shed pounds like crazy and get the body that you've always desired. It's not a guarantee that you're never going to get a cold. It's not a guarantee that you're going to have boundless energy every single day of your life. I have been vegan for 25 years. I have never once been able to do what that person in the middle is doing. If somebody told me that was what was going to come from being vegan, I would have been so disappointed. So when people expect this, when they're so sure that this is going to happen, and when this is their biggest reason for going vegan and the only way they're going to be happy, they can end up feeling like a vegan diet has failed them, like a vegan diet doesn't work. In fact, a vegan diet always works. It always makes your diet the most compassionate diet it can possibly be, and that's guaranteed. So if that's what you're looking for when you go vegan, you can never, ever be disappointed. Any health benefits that come along are very nice bonuses. So let me review real quickly what we've talked about today. 7 habits of happy, healthy vegans. Eat legumes, at least 3 servings per day of beans, peanuts, peanut butter, soy foods, pistachios, and quinoa. Eat healthy fats. Make sure that you're getting the essential omega-3 fats, the ones that are found in flaxseed and walnuts and canola oil and soy oil and chia seeds. Think about taking a supplement of DHA and EPA, just a small supplement, especially if you live in a family where there's a lot of cognitive decline, a lot of older people have developed dementia, or if you suffer from depression, it's really worth trying a little bit of DHA and EPA in your diet. It's not a miracle supplement, but it can kind of help a little bit. Oops, forgot an important thing. Moderate use of higher fat foods like nut seeds, avocado, and vegetable oils can certainly fit in your healthy vegan diet. Take appropriate supplements, vitamin B12 and vitamin D. So many vegans are resistant to taking supplements. Just do it. It will keep you healthy. You'll feel good. You'll be at lower risk for getting things like colds and other problems, and it's just so important. So if your sun exposure is not adequate, make sure you're taking a vitamin D supplement or using fortified foods. And no matter what, take a supplement of vitamin B12. Eat the rainbow. It's especially important for getting lots and lots of vitamin C to improve iron absorption. It will also help you to get enough vitamin A and can help you to get enough calcium as well. Make sure you're eating lots of calcium-rich foods: kale, collards, mustard greens, turnip greens, fortified juices, tofu, figs, almond butter, tahini, lots of easy ways to add calcium to your diet. If you can't get up to that 1,000 milligrams of calcium per day that we're supposed to be getting. If you find that you're just consistently falling short, it's fine to take a little supplement just to pop that up a little bit. You don't need a 1,000 milligram supplement though. If you're eating 600 milligrams of calcium per day, then you just need a 400 milligram supplement. Just top it off a little. Enjoy your vegan diet by emphasizing whole foods, but remembering no foods are off limits. And I know you remember that when you go out there to the exhibits. And then finally, celebrate vegan diets. Vegan diets always deliver on their promise of compassion. Health benefits vary among individuals and are a wonderful bonus. This is my information. These are my books. I am going to be signing these books out in the exhibit hall after today's talk. And I have a few other little things there, some plant plate magnets and things like that. If you're looking for me on the internet, again, my website is theveganrd.com. I'm on Facebook as The Vegan RD, Twitter as The Vegan RD, and my email is ginnymessina@gmail.com. I'm not on Instagram because I'm always about 5 years behind the curve when it comes to social networking, so I'll be there someday. Okay, thanks, and I'm happy to...
Time for your questions. So we have a volunteer passing the mic around. We just have one. So if you'll be patient, he will get to you.
Hey Jenny, could you possibly talk a little bit about intrinsic factor and absorption of B12 and how that can be possibly a problem, especially for older people, whether they're vegan or not?
Yeah.
Because I've had an issue with that myself.
Okay, there are two, is this on? Is it on? Okay. There are two issues with aging and vitamin B12 absorption, and one of them is simply that it becomes harder to digest vitamin B12. The acidic content of our stomach starts to decrease, and it's harder to break down the B12 so that we'll absorb it. And the interesting thing about that is that when people start losing the ability to absorb vitamin B12, the only way to get adequate B12 is to take supplements or use fortified foods. So the Institute of Medicine, which makes recommendations for all Americans, regardless of the kind of diet they're eating, recommends that all people over the age of 50 should be consuming, should be taking supplements of vitamin B12. All people, no matter what their diet is like. And I think most people don't know this. And I think that vegans have a real advantage where this is concerned, because if we're good vegans, we're already taking supplements. And so when we hit 50, we're already taking supplements. And I think that a lot of meat eaters don't know that, and so they don't start taking supplements, and they're running the risk. The other question is about intrinsic factor, which is completely different, because that is a compound that's needed for vitamin B12 absorption, and some people simply lack it. And if they lack it, there's no type of vitamin B12 that you can absorb, and then you have to get B12 injections. And again, it's not a vegan issue. It can happen to anybody. And it is the most common type of vitamin B12 deficiency, and it has nothing to do with vegan diets.
Yeah, I had this happen. I've been vegan for 20 years, and I had my B12 checked, I don't know, a few years ago, and it was fine, and I didn't really worry about it because I was taking a supplement, pretty regularly. And a big supplement, so, pretty regularly. Should have been enough to keep me topped up. But I started having some problems like the depression, just sort of general fog and stuff like that. So I eventually got my B12 checked, and it was low, but my doctor didn't tell me how low it was. And I was like, oh, I'll just up my supplements, it'll be okay. And then we checked it again, and 8 months later, it had dropped. Originally it was 225, and it dropped to 175 with daily supplementation. So I ended up taking injections, and it's up to 750, and I feel great. And everything, like every other thing that was going on with my body that was messed up, got better because of the B12.
Yeah, and that would certainly happen. And again, this is a genetic thing, and has nothing to do with your diet. It can happen to anybody. Lots of omnivores lack intrinsic factor.
Are there different kinds of vitamin D?
Well, the vitamin D3 and vitamin D2 that I talked about are the two different kinds. And vitamin D2 is vegan, so it's usually used to fortify plant milks, and it's in vegan supplements. And when people are only taking vitamin D on when they're taking big doses once a month, The vitamin D2, the vegan one, tends to drop out of the blood more quickly. But when people are taking it on a daily basis, it doesn't matter. Either one of those is fine. So it's good to use the vegan one.
This could be old news, so I'm sorry if I'm beating a dead horse, but I have a lingering concern about soy and estrogen, and I noticed that you mentioned tofu and soy beans quite a lot. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I know that I could talk about it all day, actually. It's, because it is such a huge subject, and there's so many things that people are concerned about. But the main issue is that, I'll see if I can make this very brief. The main issue is that soy contains phytochemicals that are called isoflavones, and they are phytoestrogens. They are plant estrogens. They are different from the hormone estrogen, from the mammalian hormone estrogen, in important ways, in that they don't always act like estrogen in the body. In some tissues they act like estrogen, in some tissues they act in opposite ways of estrogen, in some tissues they don't do anything at all, even though estrogen does. So they're called selective estrogen modulators because they're selective in what they do throughout the body. So when people say, oh, well, you know, soy contains estrogen, that's not true. It contains a compound that is like estrogen sometimes, but not always. And when we look at the study, what we're seeing, for example, is that soy doesn't act like estrogen in the bones. Estrogen improves bone health. It's very good for bones in postmenopausal women. Soy doesn't do it. It doesn't have that benefit. But in things like breast cancer, where estrogen has negative benefits, has harmful benefits, soy has positive benefits. And there's really good research showing that young girls who eat soy during puberty, when their breasts are developing, go on to have a much lower lifelong risk of getting breast cancer. And women who have been treated for breast cancer, there's a number of studies in both China and the United States showing that women who have been treated for breast cancer who eat soy have a better prognosis of not having their breast cancer return. So it's a tremendously complex science. But what we see about soy is very reassuring. My husband is an expert in soy nutrition. He worked at the National Cancer Institute 30 years ago and started their program to look at soy and cancer, which is still going. And you know, he's not a believer like soy is going to save your life, but he's a believer in the fact that it's safe. And I eat 2 to 3 servings of soy per day, which is what the Japanese eat. And I figure, you know, it's okay for them, it's okay for me. Yeah.
Hi, I had 2 questions about almond, almond milk, and just the regular almond nuts. Almond milk, is that good for calcium?
If it's fortified with calcium, it's good for calcium, yeah. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because one thing I wanted to point out, which I forgot to mention, when I talked about legumes, about eating 3 servings of legumes per day, you may notice that I had soy milk up there, but I did not have almond milk and rice milk and cashew milk, because those milks are too low in protein to count as a legume. So you can't depend on them for protein. But if they're fortified with calcium, they're great for calcium. Excellent sources.
I am a budding vegetarian, and my family's really bad about this. I have an issue with textures, especially in fruits, and it's an issue for me to eat them. Like, I start to have gag reflexes. Are there any tips or things, like, you know, to do with food to maybe go around that?
That's an interesting, well, that's a first, that question. Is it only with fruits?
Some other vegetables too, but primarily with bananas.
Okay, yeah, I can't, okay, so I'm a man after my own heart. I can't eat bananas either. And I don't like the way they smell, is my problem, not the texture. But, you know, you don't have to eat every plant food in the world. Most people get by very well on fairly limited diets. I mean, we find the foods that we really enjoy and that are easy to prepare and easy to take to work, and we kind of eat the same stuff over and over again. Vegans do that as well as everybody else in the world. And then, you know, for parties and stuff, of course, you branch out. So I think that you just really have to find the foods that you're comfortable with. And these other ones, the foods that make you gag, leave them alone. Because no, that should never be a part of your life. You don't want to eat You don't want to be eating food that is that uncomfortable for you. So if you can build a healthy diet around the foods that you enjoy, and you could email me if you'd like and tell me what those foods are, and I could tell you whether that's going to be an adequate diet for you or not. I did have a friend of mine who was just in the process of going vegan, came over to my house and asked me for help, and she told me that she was having a big problem because she found all of the food was too mushy. And she was really missing that texture. So I encouraged her to try some frozen tofu, freeze the tofu and then defrost it. It has a really nice spongy texture. And to eat some veggie meats. You know, that's what they're for, is to bring that texture back to meals. So eat what you can. You don't have to eat everything. If you don't like it, don't eat it. No bananas.
So one of my main concerns about soy is the genetically modified organisms. Can you speak on that and why it's not really something we should consider when choosing veggie proteins and such?
I'm sorry, I'm not seeing who that is.
Oh, it's right over here.
Oh, okay. So, can you ask again? I'm sorry, I was so busy looking for you.
I'm sorry. One of my biggest things about eating soy in large amounts, it's not the estrogen, but it's the fact that soybeans are one of the highest GMO rated veggies, and I've heard a lot of hype about how that can be very unhealthy. So what can you do to combat that, and is it something that we should be really concerned about when choosing veggie proteins and such?
Well, you know, I know that there's a lot of hype, and I never talk about it because, first of all, GMO is not, people always expect me to talk about GMO and are often disappointed when I don't. It's not a nutrition issue, and therefore I don't have any expertise in GMO, so I can't really talk about it. I don't follow that science. It's completely different from what I do. And it's also not a vegan issue. It doesn't pertain to the kind of veganism that I practice, which is just helping people to know what foods to choose to make sure they're meeting nutrient needs. However, it is a question that comes up a lot, and I know that people are concerned about it. But I think that almost all of the veggie meats that are marketed to vegans or to health-conscious people are organic and GMO-free. So I think that, if you read the labels that you'll find, I think what you would find, honestly, is that it's becoming difficult to find veggie meats and tofu and products like that that are not GMO-free. It's really getting a lot easier. So I think if you stick to organic and you just take a peek at the labels, you can feel pretty confident that you're getting GMO-free stuff.
Hi, my question is concerning vitamin D and B12, since those mainly come from animals, when we actually take those supplements, does that mean that I'm taking the supplement from an animal?
No.
Like, is it coming from, like, if I go into the store and buy B12, does that mean it's coming from them?
No, they're not. The vitamin D, if you're taking vitamin D2, ergocalciferol, that comes from yeast. And vitamin B12 comes from bacteria. Okay. The vitamin B12 supplements never come from animals. They're not derived from animals. That would be way too much trouble to make them that way. It's way easier to grow them in a lab in bacterial culture.
Can we
so you
get
never have to worry about it.
B12 from wheatgrass?
No.
No?
No. No.
Okay,
I know,
thank you.
I know.
All right, we have time for 2 more questions, and I think I've already promised them to 2 people over here. So if you have any questions after that, Ginny might have some time after.
I do.
One question about almonds. You were talking about the fortification process, that they don't have a lot of calcium unless they're fortified. And I was wondering, is that something that we could do? And then the other question is about nuts and seeds in general, and the soaking of them. And I was wondering if maybe there's something we could fortify in the water that we're soaking them if we have calcium.
So you want to add like a calcium powder and to the almond milk? What do you want to fortify them with?
Oh, just fortify them with calcium.
So like a calcium powder that you would stir into the milk.
Okay, and that'll get absorbed.
I would think, yeah. I think that it's basically when foods are fortified like that, it's basically drinking a glass of almond milk and taking a supplement. It's just that the supplement is in a powder and it's stirred into it. So I don't see why you couldn't do that yourself.
All right. And then soaking seeds and nuts.
Soaking seeds and nuts, and you want to do that in a water that contains calcium?
No. talking about releasing the enzyme inhibitors and that kind of thing. What's your, ideas on that?
Yeah.
What's necessary?
Well, I don't know about releasing the enzyme inhibitors. I don't know that there's much benefit in that regard. But soaking seeds and nuts does make the minerals more absorbable, like zinc and iron. So it can be a good thing to do.
Hey, I know another big buzzword that people are doing right now is the gluten-free thing. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have lots of thoughts on that. The evidence tells us that about 1% of the population has celiac disease and absolutely has to not have gluten in their diet. And then there's probably around 5% of the population that might have some gluten intolerance or some discomfort when they eat gluten. And everybody else should be fine eating gluten. My issue with it, of course, is that gluten-free has become so conflated with veganism. And every time I go into a natural food store and ask for a vegan cookie, they say, oh, we don't have a vegan cookie, but we have gluten-free. And like that's supposed to satisfy me, and it doesn't. And so I think we've seen people get so crazy over the gluten-free thing that they're forgetting about the important thing, which is choosing a diet that helps animals and not getting all caught up in made up stuff about nutrition. So that's the short version of the lot of stuff I have to say about gluten.
Well, thank you so much, Jenny. Let's give her another round of applause.